The gunshot that killed Thomas Merritt's wife echoed in his mind every single day for 2 years, and on this scorching afternoon in June of 1878, he barely flinched when another shot rang out from the saloon down the street in Sacramento, California. Thomas sat on the porch of his weathered ranch house, bottle in hand, staring at nothing while the world continued without him. He had stopped shaving weeks ago, stopped caring about the cattle that wandered his property, stopped pretending that life held any meaning after Sarah had been caught in the crossfire of a bank robbery gone wrong. The ranch that had once been their dream now felt like a prison, and Thomas welcomed the slow decay of everything around him because it matched the rot inside his chest. The sound of a wagon approaching broke through his stupor, but he did not bother looking up. Visitors were rare, and he had made it clear to everyone in Sacramento that he wanted to be left alone. The wagon stopped near his fence, and he heard a woman's voice speaking to someone, urgent and strained. Thomas took another drink, determined to ignore whatever trouble had arrived at his doorstep. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was closer now, just beyond his porch. "I need help. My wagon wheel broke and my father is injured." Thomas finally lifted his head, squinting against the bright California sun. Standing before him was a woman in her early 20s with auburn hair tucked under a bonnet, green eyes wide with worry, and dirt smudged across her cheek. Behind her, an old wagon tilted at an angle, one wheel completely shattered. In the back, Thomas could see an older man lying still, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Not my problem," Thomas said, his voice rough from disuse. The woman's face hardened. "My father might die if I do not get him to a doctor. The wheel broke 3 miles back, and I have been walking alongside this wagon, trying to keep it steady. I saw your ranch and thought someone here might have basic human decency." Thomas stood, swaying slightly. "You thought wrong, please." The desperation in her voice cut through his alcoholic haze. "I am not asking you to care about us. I am asking you to do what any decent person would do. Help me fix the wheel or lend me a horse. Anything." He stared at her, seeing the exhaustion in her stance, the way her hands trembled. Something in her eyes reminded him of Sarah, that same fierce determination she'd had when facing down trouble. Against every instinct telling him to retreat back into his bottle, Thomas descended the porch steps. "I will look at the wheel," he muttered. Relief flooded the woman's face. "Thank you." "My name is Grace Brennan. That is my father, William." Thomas grunted in acknowledgement and walked to the wagon. The wheel was beyond repair, split down the middle. He examined the axle and saw it was still intact. "You have a spare?" "No," Grace said, coming to stand beside him. "We were traveling from Nevada, trying to reach my aunt's house in Sacramento. We did not prepare well enough." "That is an understatement." Thomas circled the wagon, his mind working through the problem despite himself. "I have an old wheel in my barn that might fit. We will need to jack up the wagon and secure it properly." "I can help," Grace said immediately. Thomas glanced at her father, who had not moved. "He needs water and someone to check that leg. Might be broken." "I know it is broken. He fell yesterday when we were crossing through rocky terrain." The wheel held until this morning, and then everything went wrong at once. Thomas walked to the well and pumped water into a bucket, then handed it to Grace along with a ladle. "Give him small sips. I will get the wheel." As he walked to his barn, Thomas wondered why he was doing this. For 2 years, he had successfully pushed away everyone who tried to reach him. The ranchers who offered help, the townsfolk who brought food, the priest who spoke of healing and time. He had wanted nothing except to be left alone with his grief and his whiskey. Yet here he was, rummaging through the cluttered barn for a wagon wheel, because a strange woman with green eyes had asked him for help. He found the wheel buried under old tack and supplies. It was dusty but solid. Thomas carried it back to the wagon, along with a jack and tools. Grace was kneeling beside her father, speaking softly to him. The old man's eyes were open now, glazed with pain. "Mister," William croaked, "thank you for stopping. My daughter, she needs to get to safety." "Rest easy," Thomas said gruffly. "We will fix this." Working in the heat proved difficult. Thomas's hands, once steady and sure, shook from the drinking. Sweat poured down his face as he jacked up the wagon, and twice he had to pause to catch his breath. Grace worked alongside him without complaint, holding tools, bracing the wagon, following his terse instructions. She was stronger than she looked, and she did not flinch from the hard labor. "How did your father break his leg?" Thomas asked as they maneuvered the new wheel onto the axle. "We were camped in the foothills. A snake spooked our horse and the wagon lurched. My father was thrown off and landed badly. I wanted to stop and find help, but he insisted we keep moving. He said his sister would know what to do." Grace wiped sweat from her forehead. "Stubborn man, my father. He never asks for help until it is too late." Thomas heard the criticism in her words, but also the love. "Sounds familiar. Are you stubborn too, Mr. Merritt?" He paused, realizing he had never told her his name. "How do you know who I am?" "I heard about you in town when we passed through Sacramento 2 days ago. The grieving cowboy who lost his wife. The man who gave up." Grace met his eyes without flinching. "People talked about you with pity." Anger flared in Thomas's chest. "They should mind their own business." "Maybe. But sitting on your porch drinking yourself to death is not going to bring her back." Thomas's hands clenched around the wrench. "You do not know anything about it. You are right. I do not know what it is like to lose a wife, but I know what it is like to lose someone you love. My mother died when I was 16. She got sick one winter and there was nothing anyone could do. My father barely survived it. He stopped eating, stopped working, stopped living, and I had to watch him waste away while trying to keep our household together." "So what changed?" Thomas asked, despite himself. "I told him that he was dishonoring her memory by giving up. My mother loved life. She found joy in small things, in morning sunrises and fresh bread and the sound of rain. She would have been heartbroken to see what he had become. So I made him promise to try, just try to live again. Not for himself, but for her." Thomas was quiet as they finished securing the wheel. The words settled into him uncomfortably, like a stone in his boot. He tested the wheel, making sure it would hold, and then lowered the jack. "That should get you to Sacramento," he said, avoiding Grace's gaze. "Thank you, truly." She hesitated. "Would you help me get my father inside the wagon? I want him more comfortable for the last few miles." Together they lifted William and arranged blankets to cushion his injured leg. The old man gripped Thomas's arm. "You are a good man. Do not let anyone tell you different." Thomas pulled away without responding. He watched as Grace climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins. She looked down at him, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "If you ever find yourself in Sacramento and need a hot meal, ask anyone for the Brennan house. We will be staying with my Aunt Clara on 5th Street." Thomas nodded but said nothing. Grace clicked her tongue and the horse started forward. He stood in the dust as the wagon rolled away, the new wheel turning smoothly. When it disappeared from sight, he walked back to his porch, back to his bottle, but the whiskey tasted different now. Bitter. 3 days passed before Thomas rode into Sacramento. He told himself he was going for supplies, that he needed flour and coffee and ammunition. But his horse seemed to know where it was headed, and Thomas found himself on 5th Street, looking at the neat houses with their painted shutters and tidy gardens. He spotted Grace immediately. She was hanging laundry in the yard of a white house with blue trim, her hair loose and catching the sunlight. She saw him and smiled. "Mr. Merritt, I hoped you might come. Just Thomas." He dismounted, feeling awkward and out of place. "I was in town. Thought I would check if your father made it to the doctor." "He did. The doctor set his leg and he is recovering well. Come inside. You can see for yourself." Thomas followed her into the house, which smelled of baking bread and lavender. An older woman with gray hair and Grace's eyes greeted him warmly. "You must be the man who helped Grace and William. I am Clara Brennan. Please sit. You will stay for lunch." "I do not want to impose," Thomas started, but Clara waved away his protest. "Nonsense. You saved my brother's life and my niece's safety. The least we can do is feed you." Thomas found himself at a table laden with food, more food than he had seen in months. William sat with his leg propped up, looking much better than he had 3 days ago. They talked about the ranch, about the journey from Nevada, about Sacramento and its growing pains as civilization slowly tamed the wild edges of California. Thomas spoke more than he had in 2 years, and it felt strange but not entirely unwelcome. After the meal, Grace walked him outside. "My aunt invited you to dinner on Sunday. She is making her famous roast chicken." "I should not," Thomas said, but the words lacked conviction. "Why not? You have to eat anyway, unless you prefer your own cooking, which I doubt based on how much you ate today." Grace's tone was teasing, gentle. "Besides, I think you could use the company." "I am not good company. Let me be the judge of that." She touched his arm lightly. "Please come. It would make my aunt happy and me." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. Grace was pretty, yes, but it was more than that. There was a warmth to her, a genuine kindness that reminded him of what he had lost. And yet, she was not Sarah. She was entirely herself, and that made all the difference. "Sunday," he agreed. He came for Sunday dinner, and then he came the following Sunday and the one after that. Each visit grew easier. Clara always had a project for him, a door that needed fixing or a shelf to hang. William, confined to his chair, enjoyed having someone to talk ranching with. And Grace was always there, bringing coffee, laughing at his dry observations, slowly drawing him back into the world of the living. One evening in August, Grace asked if she could see his ranch. Thomas hesitated, knowing what she would find. The place was a mess, neglected and sad. But he could not bring himself to lie to her. "It is not much to see anymore," he warned. "I would still like to visit." The next day, Grace rode out with him. Thomas watched her face as she took in the overgrown yard, the peeling paint, the sagging fence. She said nothing, just walked through the house, touching things carefully. She paused at a photograph on the mantel, a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile. "That is Sarah," Thomas said quietly, "my wife. She was beautiful, she was everything." The words came out broken. "We had plans, Grace. We were going to expand the herd, build a bigger house, have children. And then one day she went into town for fabric, and she never came home. Some idiot tried to rob the bank, and the sheriff's deputy started shooting, and Sarah was just there, just in the wrong place." Grace turned to him, tears in her eyes. "I am so sorry, Thomas. I should have been with her. I should have gone into town instead. I should have done something, anything different that day. You cannot live in the should-haves. Believe me, I have tried." Grace moved closer. "After my mother died, I spent months thinking of all the things I could have done differently. Maybe if I had called the doctor sooner, maybe if I had tried a different medicine, maybe if I had prayed harder, but none of it would have changed anything. Sometimes terrible things just happen, and we have to find a way to keep living." "I do not know how," Thomas admitted, and it was the most honest thing he had said in 2 years. "You start small. You fix one fence post. You cook one real meal. You wake up one morning and decide to try." Grace took his hand. "And you let people help you?" Thomas looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her skin, the gentle pressure of her fingers. Something inside him, something that had been frozen solid, began to crack. "Help me fix the fence," he said. Grace smiled. "I thought you would never ask." They worked through the afternoon, replacing rotted posts and tightening wire. Grace was capable and uncomplaining, and her presence made the work feel less like a burden. They talked about everything and nothing, and Thomas found himself laughing for the first time since Sarah's death. It was a small laugh, rusty and brief, but it happened. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, they sat on the porch steps sharing water from a canteen. Grace leaned against him slightly, and Thomas did not pull away. "My father wants to go back to Nevada once his leg heals," Grace said, "but I am thinking of staying here with my aunt." Thomas's heart jumped. "Why? I like Sacramento, and I like the people here." She turned to look at him, her green eyes serious. "I like you, Thomas. I know that might be too forward, and I know you are still grieving, but I wanted to be honest. Grace." He struggled for words. "I am not the man I was. I am broken. Everyone is broken in some way. That does not mean we cannot heal." She stood, brushing off her skirt. "I should get back before my aunt worries, but I will come again if you want me to." "I want you to," Thomas said, and meant it. The weeks that followed brought a slow transformation. Grace visited the ranch regularly, sometimes bringing Clara or her father, sometimes coming alone. She helped Thomas clean the house, room by room, packing away Sarah's things with reverence but also practicality. She cooked meals in the kitchen and made curtains for the windows. She brought life back to the place, not by erasing what had been, but by making space for what could be. Thomas found himself caring again about things he had abandoned. He repaired the barn, mended fences, checked on his cattle. He shaved and cut his hair. He stopped drinking so much, and then he stopped entirely. The whiskey bottles disappeared from the porch, replaced by a rocking chair that Grace had found in town. One September evening, they sat together on that rocking chair, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Thomas had his arm around Grace, and she rested her head on his shoulder. It felt right in a way that scared him. "I am afraid," he confessed. "Of what?" "Of losing you. Of caring about someone again and having them ripped away." Grace was quiet for a moment. "I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen. Life does not work that way. But I can promise that I am here now, and I choose to be here with you." Is not that enough? Thomas thought about it, really thought about it. For 2 years he had been living in the past, trapped by what he had lost. Grace was offering him a present, a future, something real and tangible and good. It would mean taking a risk, opening himself up to potential pain again. But it would also mean living, truly living, instead of just existing. "Yes," he said, "it is enough." He kissed her then, soft and tentative, and Grace kissed him back with gentle certainty. It was nothing like kissing Sarah had been, and that was okay. This was new, different, its own thing entirely. When they pulled apart, Thomas felt tears on his cheeks. "I still love her," he whispered. "I always will. I know. I would not ask you to stop." Grace wiped his tears away. "Love does not run out, Thomas. You can love her memory and still love someone new. There is room in your heart for both." The truth of her words settled into him, and Thomas felt the last of his resistance crumble. He had been so afraid of dishonoring Sarah by moving forward, but now he understood that the real dishonor would be wasting the life she no longer had. In October, Thomas asked Grace to marry him. He did it simply, without flourish, kneeling in the garden she had planted beside his house. "I know I am not much, and I know I have a long way to go before I am whole again, but I love you, Grace Brennan. Will you marry me?" Grace pulled him to his feet, laughing and crying at once. "Yes. Yes, of course yes." They were married in November in the small church in Sacramento. William walked Grace down the aisle, his leg healed enough to manage with a cane. Clara cried happy tears. The town turned out in surprising numbers. People who had known Thomas before his tragedy and were glad to see him returning to life. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when Thomas kissed his bride, he felt Sarah's blessing like a warm breeze. Grace moved into the ranch house, and together they made it a home. She brought her books and her sewing basket and her laughter. Thomas taught her to ride better, and she taught him to cook more than beans and bacon. They worked side by side, building something new on the foundation of what had been lost. The first year of marriage was not always easy. Thomas had nightmares sometimes, and there were days when grief caught him unexpectedly, doubling him over with the weight of it. Grace never tried to fix him or hurry him along. She simply held him when he needed holding and gave him space when he needed space. She understood that healing was not a straight line but a winding path with setbacks and detours. In the spring of 1880, Grace discovered she was pregnant. Thomas was terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. The thought of bringing a child into the world filled him with hope and fear. What if something went wrong? What if he lost Grace the way he had lost Sarah? Grace took his face in her hands and made him look at her. "We are going to be fine. All of us. Trust me." Thomas tried. When the fears got too loud, he worked on building a cradle, his hands steady and sure. He fixed up the spare bedroom and painted it yellow, the color of sunshine. He talked to the baby through Grace's growing belly, telling stories about the ranch and the mountains and the life they would build together. Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with Grace's green eyes and Thomas's dark hair. They named him William Thomas Merritt, after Grace's father and Thomas himself. Holding his son for the first time, Thomas understood what Grace had meant about love not running out. His heart expanded to hold this new person, this miracle, without diminishing what he felt for Sarah or for Grace. Fatherhood changed Thomas in ways he had not anticipated. The recklessness that had characterized his grief years vanished, replaced by a fierce protectiveness and a renewed sense of purpose. He wanted to build something lasting for his son, a legacy and a life worth living. As William grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Thomas worked hard and Grace managed the household with efficiency and warmth. They hired a hand to help with the cattle, a young man named Miguel who had drifted up from Mexico looking for honest work. The ranch became a place of activity and life again, with cattle lowing in the fields and chickens scratching in the yard, and a child's laughter ringing through the house. On William's second birthday, in December of 1882, the family gathered for a celebration. Clara had made a cake, and Grace's father, now fully recovered, bounced his grandson on his knee. Miguel joined them for dinner, having become more family than employee. They ate and laughed and told stories, and Thomas looked around the table feeling something he had not felt in years: contentment. That night, after everyone had gone home and William was tucked into bed, Thomas and Grace sat on their porch in the rocking chair. The December air was cool but not cold, typical of California winters. "Are you happy?" Grace asked. Thomas considered the question seriously. "Yes. I did not think I would ever say that again, but yes, I am happy." "Good." She snuggled closer to him. "Because I have news, I am pregnant again." Thomas's arms tightened around her. "Are you sure?" "Very sure. You are going to be a father again come summer." Joy rushed through him, pure and uncomplicated. A bigger family. "Is that all right?" "It is more than all right. It is perfect." Their daughter was born in July of 1883, a hot summer day when the heat made everything shimmer. Grace labored through the afternoon with the midwife and Clara attending, and Thomas paced outside, praying to every deity he could think of. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged, smiling. "You have a daughter, Mr. Merritt. And your wife is doing well." Thomas entered the bedroom to find Grace exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Meet your daughter, Thomas." He took the baby carefully, marveling at her tiny features, her wispy blonde hair, her perfect fingers. "She is beautiful. What should we name her?" Grace smiled. "I was thinking Sarah, after your first wife. She is part of our family too, in a way." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. Sarah Brennan Merritt, it sounds right." Naming his daughter after his first wife felt like a circle closing, a way of honoring the past while embracing the future. Baby Sarah grew strong and healthy, and William became a doting older brother, always wanting to help with his little sister. The years flowed by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of childhood. William learned to ride at 4, sitting in front of Thomas on the saddle. Sarah took her first steps chasing chickens in the yard. Grace expanded her garden, growing vegetables and flowers that drew bees and butterflies. Thomas built additions onto the house, creating more space for their growing family. In the spring of 1885, tragedy struck when Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep. She had been in her 70s, and her heart simply gave out. The family mourned her deeply, but Thomas found he could face the grief without being destroyed by it. He had learned that loss was part of life, and that honoring the dead meant continuing to live fully. Grace's father, now in his late 60s, moved into the ranch house with them. He could not manage on his own anymore, and Thomas welcomed him gladly. William the elder became a fixture on the porch, telling his grandchildren stories about the old days, about wagon trains and gold rushes and the wild frontier that was slowly being tamed. By 1887, William was 7 and Sarah was 4, and Thomas could hardly remember the broken man he had once been. Oh, he still thought of his first Sarah sometimes, especially on the anniversary of her death. But the memories no longer hurt as sharply. They had softened into something bittersweet, a reminder of love rather than a wound that would not heal. One evening in late summer, Grace found Thomas in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. She leaned against the stall, watching him work with practiced ease. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what? This life, us." "Everything that came after." Thomas straightened, giving her his full attention. "Never, not for a single moment. You saved me, Grace. You gave me a reason to keep living when I had given up completely." "You saved yourself," Grace corrected. "I just helped you remember how." "Then we saved each other." He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "I love you. I hope you know that." "I do know. And I love you too." She kissed him softly. "Come inside soon. Your daughter wants you to read her a story before bed." "I will be right there." Thomas finished with the mare and walked back to the house. Through the window, he could see his family gathered in the warm light of the living room. William was playing with wooden horses that Thomas had carved. Sarah was dancing to music only she could hear. Grace was setting out plates for tomorrow's breakfast. And William the elder sat in his chair, a blanket over his knees, smiling at the scene. This was his life now. Not the one he had planned with his first wife, but a good life nonetheless. A life full of love and purpose, and the simple joys that came from building something lasting. Thomas had learned that moving forward did not mean forgetting the past. It meant carrying the past with you, letting it inform who you became without letting it define everything you would be. He climbed the porch steps and opened the door, stepping into the warmth and light of home. The years continued their steady march. William grew tall and serious, showing an aptitude for ranching that made Thomas proud. He taught his son everything he knew about cattle and horses, about reading weather and land, about the hard work required to make a life from the California soil. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to help her mother in the garden or the kitchen. She had Grace's green eyes and a spirit that could not be contained. In 1889, Grace gave birth to their third child, another son they named Daniel. The pregnancy had been unexpected, as Grace was now in her early 30s, but the baby was healthy and strong. 3 children meant the house was always full of noise and activity, and Thomas loved every chaotic moment of it. Grace's father passed away peacefully in the winter of 1890, surrounded by his family. He had lived to see his grandchildren grow, and he died content, knowing Grace was happy and well cared for. They buried him next to Clara in the Sacramento cemetery, and Thomas said a prayer of thanks for the old man who had raised such a remarkable daughter. William turned 10 in 1890, and Thomas decided it was time to teach him about responsibility. He gave his son charge of a small section of the ranch, 5 head of cattle that would be William's to care for and manage. The boy took to the task with determination, waking early to check on his animals, keeping meticulous records of their health and growth. Thomas watched his son with pride, seeing the man he would become. Sarah, now 7, begged to learn to ride properly, not just sitting in front of her father but handling the reins herself. Thomas was hesitant at first, remembering all the ways horses could be dangerous, but Grace encouraged him to trust their daughter. So Thomas taught Sarah to ride, starting slow and careful, and was amazed at her natural ability. She had no fear, only joy, and she rode like she had been born to it. Daniel was a quiet baby who grew into a thoughtful toddler. He watched everything with solemn eyes, taking in the world before acting. Where William was confident and Sarah was adventurous, Daniel was careful and methodical. Thomas loved seeing the different personalities of his children, the unique ways they each approached life. The ranch continued to prosper. Thomas had expanded his herd, purchased more land, built a better barn. He had a reputation now as a fair employer and a skilled cattleman. People came to him for advice, and he gave it freely, remembering the dark days when he had refused all help and community. In the evenings, Thomas and Grace would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over their land. Sometimes they talked about the children or the ranch business. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, Grace's hand in his, content to simply be together. These were the moments Thomas treasured most, the quiet peace of a life well lived. One spring evening in 1892, as they sat together watching the sky turn purple and gold, Grace said, "Do you remember when we first met? When I showed up at your ranch with my broken wagon and my injured father?" "Of course I remember. You were so angry at the world, so determined to be left alone." "I was a fool," Thomas said. "I wasted 2 years feeling sorry for myself. You were grieving. That is not the same as being a fool." Grace squeezed his hand. "But I am glad you let me help you. I am glad you took the risk of caring again. I am glad you were stubborn enough not to give up on me." Thomas turned to look at his wife, seeing the lines that time had etched around her eyes, the silver threads beginning to show in her auburn hair. She was more beautiful to him now than she had been at 23. "You gave me everything, Grace. A family, a purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning. I will never be able to thank you enough for that. You do not need to thank me, just love me. That is enough. I do love you. More than I can say." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then we are the luckiest people in the world." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, brilliant points of light in the darkening sky. Inside the house, their children were preparing for bed, the sounds of their voices and laughter drifting out through the open windows. This was home. This was family. This was the life Thomas had rebuilt from the ashes of his grief. The summer of 1893 brought a drought that tested every rancher in California. Water became scarce, and Thomas had to make difficult decisions about his herd. He sold off some cattle rather than watch them suffer, and he spent long hours digging deeper into the well, searching for water. William, now 13, worked alongside his father without complaint, and together they kept the ranch going through the dry months. When the rains finally came in October, it felt like a blessing. The land greened up almost overnight, and the cattle grew fat on the new grass. Thomas stood in the rain with his face turned up to the sky, letting the water soak him through, feeling grateful for the simple gift of precipitation. Grace watched from the porch, laughing at him. "You are going to catch your death of cold. It is worth it," Thomas called back. "Come dance with me. You are crazy. Maybe, but you love me anyway." Grace ran out into the rain, and Thomas caught her, spinning her around while the water poured down on them both. They danced in the mud like children, laughing and kissing, celebrating the end of the drought and the continuation of their life together. The children joined them, William and Sarah and Daniel splashing and playing, the family united in joy and relief. These were the moments that defined Thomas's second chance at life. Not the big dramatic events, but the small everyday miracles. A child's hug, a wife's smile, rain after a long drought, work well done, a good meal shared with people you loved. These things made life worth living, and Thomas had almost thrown them all away in his grief. As the years rolled on, Thomas watched his children grow into young people with their own dreams and personalities. William talked about ranching, about taking over the family business someday. Sarah wanted to be a teacher, to work in the new school that had opened in Sacramento. Daniel, still young, had not decided yet, but he loved books and learning, and Thomas suspected he would do something different from ranching. In 1895, when William turned 15, Thomas officially made him a partner in the ranch. The boy had earned it through years of hard work and dedication. They shook hands on it, man to man, and Thomas felt a fierce pride in his eldest son. Sarah, now 12, was becoming a young woman, smart and capable and kind. She helped Grace with the household and the garden, but she also spent hours reading and studying, preparing herself for the future she envisioned. Thomas supported her dreams, even though part of him wanted to keep her young and safe forever. Daniel, at 5, was a charming child who could talk to anyone about anything. He made friends easily, and he had a gift for bringing people together. Thomas saw leadership qualities in his youngest son, a natural charisma that would serve him well in whatever path he chose. Grace remained the center of their family, the heart that kept everything beating. She managed the household with efficiency, raised the children with wisdom and love, and supported Thomas in all his endeavors. She was his partner in every sense of the word, and Thomas could not imagine his life without her. One evening in the fall of 1896, Thomas sat on the porch with Grace, watching their children play in the yard. William was teaching Daniel to rope a fence post while Sarah read a book under a tree, occasionally looking up to laugh at her brother's antics. "We did well," Thomas said quietly. "We did," Grace agreed. "I think about her sometimes, you know. Sarah, my first wife, I wonder what she would think of all this. I think she would be happy for you, happy that you found love again and built a good life. I hope so." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I used to feel guilty about being happy, like I was betraying her memory by moving forward. And now I understand that the best way to honor someone's memory is to live fully. Sarah loved life. She would not have wanted me to waste mine in grief." Thomas took Grace's hand. "Thank you for teaching me that. You learned it yourself. I just reminded you that it was possible." They sat together as the sun set, painting the California sky in shades of orange and red and purple. The air was cooling as autumn settled over the land, and Thomas could smell the harvest in the breeze. It was a good smell, the smell of abundance and hard work rewarded. In the years that followed, life continued its steady progression. William grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, ready to take on more responsibility. In 1898, at the age of 18, he started courting a young woman from Sacramento, a sweet-natured girl named Elizabeth who came from a good family. Thomas and Grace approved, seeing the genuine affection between the two young people. Sarah finished her studies, and at 16 began teaching at the local school. She was a natural educator, patient and creative, and her students adored her. Thomas was so proud of his daughter that he sometimes felt his chest might burst from it. Daniel, now 8, continued to be the social heart of the family. He was always organizing games and gatherings, always finding ways to bring people together. Thomas saw a future politician or businessman in his youngest son, someone who would make his mark on the world. The ranch was thriving, producing some of the best cattle in California. Thomas had built something lasting, something that would continue after he was gone. He had employees who had been with him for years, including Miguel, who was now the foreman and a trusted friend. The land was productive, the animals healthy, and the business sound. But more than any material success, Thomas treasured his family. Grace was his anchor, his love, his best friend. After nearly 20 years of marriage, he still looked forward to seeing her every morning, still felt a thrill when she smiled at him. She had kept her promise to be there, through good times and bad, and Thomas had done the same. In the spring of 1899, William married Elizabeth in a beautiful ceremony at the Sacramento church. The whole town turned out to celebrate, and Thomas gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes. He talked about love and partnership, about building a life together, about the importance of holding on even when things got hard. He spoke from experience, and his words resonated with everyone who heard them. After the wedding, as Thomas and Grace danced at the reception, she whispered, "Soon we will be grandparents." Thomas pulled back to look at her. "Are they expecting already?" "Not yet, but soon, I think. And then our family will grow even more." The thought of grandchildren filled Thomas with joy. He was 52 years old now, his hair going gray, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But he felt young in spirit, energized by the life he had built and the future that stretched ahead. Sure enough, in early 1900, Elizabeth announced she was pregnant. The baby was due in the fall, and the whole family buzzed with excitement. Sarah started knitting blankets, Daniel carved wooden toys, and Thomas began work on a cradle, his hands steady and sure as he shaped the wood. In September of 1900, Thomas became a grandfather when Elizabeth gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Clara, after Grace's aunt. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Thomas felt the circle of life complete itself. From the depths of despair to this moment of pure joy, he had traveled so far. And it had all started with a broken wagon wheel and a woman named Grace who refused to let him give up. As the new century dawned, Thomas looked back on his life with gratitude. He had loved and lost and then loved again. He had known the darkness of grief and the light of redemption. He had built a family, a home, a legacy that would last beyond his years. And through it all, Grace had been there, his constant companion, his second chance, his great love. The ranch house was often full now, with William and Elizabeth and baby Clara visiting regularly, with Sarah coming home between teaching terms, with Daniel growing taller every day. There was always noise, always activity, always life. And Thomas, who had once sat on his porch wanting nothing more than to fade away, now embraced every moment with open arms. On a warm evening in the summer of 1901, the entire family gathered for a celebration. It was Thomas's birthday, his 54th, and Grace had organized a party with food and music and laughter. They ate under the stars, all of them together, 3 generations sharing stories and making memories. As the evening wound down and the children were put to bed, Thomas found himself alone with Grace on their favorite spot on the porch. She nestled into his side and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "Happy birthday, my love," Grace said softly. "It is a good birthday. The best I have had in many years, try ever," Grace laughed. "You are not good at hiding your happiness, Thomas Merritt. Why would I want to hide it? I have everything I could ever want right here." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted in the distance. Cattle lowed softly. The wind whispered through the grass. It was a peaceful symphony, the soundtrack of a life well lived. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Grace asked. "When I showed up with my broken wagon, I told you it was not my problem." "You did. You were quite rude, actually." Grace's tone was teasing. "But I am glad I did not give up on you. So am I. You changed everything, Grace. You gave me back my life. We gave each other our lives. That is what love does. It transforms us, makes us better than we were alone." Grace tilted her face up to look at him. "I love you, Thomas, today, tomorrow, and all the days after. I love you too. Always." Thomas kissed his wife under the stars, surrounded by the land they had worked together, the home they had built together, the family they had created together. He thought briefly of his first Sarah, sending her a silent thank you for the years they had shared, and a promise that he would always remember her with love. And then he turned his full attention to the present, to the woman in his arms and the life they were still living. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility. There would be more grandchildren, more milestones, more joys and sorrows and ordinary miracles. There would be challenges and triumphs, losses and gains, the full spectrum of human experience. But Thomas would face it all with Grace by his side, and that made all the difference. He had learned the most important lesson of his life, that caring again after loss was not a betrayal but an act of courage. That love did not diminish when shared but multiplied. That the human heart was capable of holding infinite joy and infinite sorrow, and that both were necessary for a life fully lived. Thomas Merritt had been a grieving cowboy who stopped caring about life. Then Grace Brennan arrived, and slowly, carefully, patiently, he started caring again. And in that caring, he found not just survival but transformation. He found purpose and meaning and a love that would sustain him through all his remaining years. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Thomas and Grace remained on their porch, holding each other, grateful for every moment they had been given. The broken cowboy had been healed by the determined woman who saw past his grief to the man he could still become. And together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of love to redeem even the most shattered heart. Their story was not one of forgetting the past, but of honoring it while embracing the future. It was a story of second chances and hard-won happiness, of grief transformed into gratitude, of death giving way to life. It was, in the end, a story of hope, and hope was the most powerful force Thomas had ever known. The years ahead would bring their share of challenges. Thomas and Grace would grow old together, watching their children build their own lives and their grandchildren grow. There would be moments of sorrow when they lost friends and faced difficulties. But there would be far more moments of joy, of love, of the deep contentment that comes from a life shared with your soulmate. And when Thomas Merritt finally passed away many years later, an old man surrounded by his large and loving family, his last thought would be of Grace, and of the day she showed up at his ranch with a broken wagon wheel and refused to let him give up on life. She had saved him in every way a person could be saved, and he had loved her for it every single day they had together. But that ending was still far in the future. For now, on this perfect summer night in 1901, Thomas and Grace sat together on their porch, alive and in love, with their whole future stretched out before them like the star-filled California sky. And that was more than enough. It was everything.